Top politics in more detail. Jeremy Corbyn, Theresa May have gone head-to-head in a Sky News special in the most dramatic moments of the election campaign so far. They both faced uncomfortable questions from a studio audience over their past and future decision-making, with Theresa May heckled at one stage.
You have openly supported the IRA in the past, and I can give you an example. Attending a commemoration for the 8 IRA men who were killed at Loughgall.
The contribution I made to that meeting was to call for a peace and dialogue process.
The problem I have is that I don't see you as someone who could effectively run this country. How can you convince me that you're the man for the job?
You should never be so high and mighty you can't listen to somebody else and learn something from them. To me, leadership is as much about using this as using this.
There is nothing in this manifesto about getting rid of the monarchy, which is another thing you believe in, isn't it?
Look, there's nothing in there because we're not going to do it.
Chief of the Defence Staff could come to you and say, we have eyes on a man in Iraq or in Syria or in Afghanistan who is plotting a bombing campaign in Britain. You have 20 minutes to make up your mind as to whether we take him out with a drone strike.
I think you have to look at all the evidence that's there, but you can't answer a hypothetical question without the evidence around it.
But it's not really hypothetical.
It's a completely hypothetical
with David
question.
Cameron and Jihadi John.
It's a completely hypothetical question. We have to look at the evidence that's there at the time.
You would be prepared.
We have to look at the evidence that's there at the time to make that fatal decision.
It's not about not knowing, Jeremy. It's about thinking what... It's about
you don't know, do you?
It's about thinking what the right approach is to get to that figure.
But you don't know.
What we want to do is to ask, is to consult, is to listen, and then to determine what that cut will be.
If I was sitting in Brussels and I was looking at you as the person I had to negotiate with, I'd think, she's a blowhard who collapses at the first sign of gunfire.
In negotiations, you have to recognise that you're prepared, that you're not in there to get a deal at any price. We're in there to get the best deal for the United Kingdom. I mean, the Labour Party's manifesto, we know the figures don't add up. What is important is that as we look... What?
Okay. You've clearly failed.
Just please let the Prime Minister answer.
Immigration was your main task, to get it down to what you promised in the manifesto, which was 100,000 or less non-EU immigrants per year net. You didn't do that, did you?
Net migration, no, we didn't achieve that. What I will be doing is, as we heard in the earlier session, what I'll be doing is being a difficult woman and ensuring that we're negotiating hard.
So, who is coming out on top with me is Guardian columnist and author Owen Jones and Kate Andrews, news editor for the Institute of Economic Affairs. Hello to you both. Hello. Thank you for joining us on Sky News. Like you both, so don't fall out too much.
Oh, we love each other too much.
Good.
We really do.
OK, let's start off with you then, should we please, Owen? He's doing really well in the polls. What is he doing that is so appealing to people that we saw last night?
Jeremy Corbyn?
Yeah.
I think he's defied all expectations, hasn't he? And I think what people like about him is, unlike Theresa May, who doesn't like campaigning, has tried to keep away from as much as possible from the British public. He loves exchanges with people. He loves talking about issues. He loves talking about what his vision for Britain will be. And I think he quite likes the scrutiny. So I think to people, he comes across as authentic, as down to earth, and someone who actually cares about what he talks about. I think the problem with Theresa May is, you know, she framed this as a presidential contest, didn't she, from the very beginning? And I think that was an error, as it's turned out, because, you know, what we've seen with her last night is the danger for every politician isn't when you're disliked, it's when you're laughed at. And she was laughed at not once or twice or 3 times, but about 7 times. She was laughed at when she attacked Labour for not costing things, even though Labour have costed their manifesto. The Tories haven't.
Well, they can't always remember the numbers, though,
well,
can they?
Well, that's the thing. You can attack Labour on their costings for not remembering what their costings are, but at least they have costings. The Tories haven't bothered to have any costings. Okay. I think it's insulting to the British public.
Yeah, they haven't bothered to cost. Labour's costs don't add up, but neither of those is a particularly fantastic option. I think Owen's right about Corbyn's substance and stamina last night. If you had been on Mars and just come down to watch this debate, no doubt Jeremy Corbyn came off more relaxed, he came off more genuine. I think he overall had the better night. But of course, you can't just look at it as if you're watching from Mars, because the context matters. If you had just shown up to watch this debate, you might be wondering, well, why is the Labour leader being asked so many questions about terrorist sympathies and the IRA? And of course, when it comes down to it, this debate, I think, really exposed the weaknesses of both candidates. Neither candidate really got the opportunity to shine. On Corbyn and for Labour, you saw their issues with security, previous statements that they've made, different candidates across the board, certain sympathies that we're all very uncomfortable with. And then on Theresa May's side and the Conservative side, you see that constant flip-flopping, and not just on social care, an issue which I actually supported her party when she decided that they wanted to make the elderly pay slightly more because the young have been disproportionately so badly affected by the cuts. But she couldn't add it up, she couldn't cost it, she did a bit of a U-turn, and now it's just in shambles. Also on immigration, I mean, the really crucial issue for her in the Home Office was, could she stick to what she promised? I don't like what she's promised to do by bringing the numbers down, but we saw the flip-flopping there too.
I think that's a critical point. Look, again, in a presidential contest, we shouldn't be having a presidential contest.
No.
It's Theresa May who made it so. We should be a parliamentary system. But she tries to present herself at the beginning as the strong and stable, as we know, till our ears have bled,
I must write
option.
that down. What was it
Indeed.
again? Yeah.
But instead she's come across as weak and wobbly, because on the early election she said over and over again there wouldn't be one. Clearly there was. On national insurance, that was a cast-iron guarantee, which was raised in the debate last night. Not to raise it, she then U-turned on a U-turn because she realised she couldn't get it through. Immigration targets, she said, for the third election running now, they'd go down to tens of thousands, not even close. The dementia tax, she then tried to do a U-turn on that, but has refused to set a cap, which she was challenged on again, over and over again. What would the cap be? Pensioners out there have absolutely no idea whatsoever. And that's why people laughed, just quickly, that's why people laughed at her.
Yeah.
They were laughing at her because no longer, I think,
no one's laughing about security and
trust,
IRA though, were
but
they?
you can't trust a single word that she says. The point I think about the IRA, I've spoken to political journalists about this, because obviously the Tories are trying to smear the opposition in this country by trying to present them as a threat to security in that way.
But it was a member of the public who was in the audience that made the point.
Yeah, but I don't think it has the traction that they hoped. And actually, this is what political journalists who are closer to the Conservative Party tell me, because I think most people recognise that we had a peace process, which obviously under New Labour we got, which has stopped people dying, that involved some pretty difficult negotiations and discussions with people who committed some pretty terrible things. And I worry in this election, actually, that with the peace process already under threat because of the nature of what the Brexit negotiations will be, will there be a hard land border, can we not put pressure on the peace process by using it to score political points?
It's not just scoring political points, is it? I mean, we have the IRA and all of those examples, but Jeremy Corbyn has repeatedly come out in support of things like Hamas. He has shown his sympathies there, and he's shown his sympathies for so many dictatorships across the world if they promote socialist values, like in Venezuela and in Cuba. I think that the British public feels like, and I actually think Paxman did a pretty decent job last night pushing on this idea. Yes, it is absolutely fine that the Labour manifesto is not as radical as Jeremy Corbyn is. Thank goodness. But we know that where his sympathies lie are so much more extreme and so much more socialist that he's been willing to defend some pretty awful regimes in the past.
Just on that, on the regimes point, I'm glad you've raised that. Theresa May is literally in an alliance, a strong, staunch alliance, with a Saudi dictatorship which exports international extremism, which is a threat to the national security of this country and the security of people, but not Jeremy Corbyn.
Okay, but
just quickly, Jeremy Corbyn has taken a principled stand against the regime, which people watching this programme need to know is a threat to the national security of this country. The extremism that we've seen all over the world, much of it comes from that regime. Theresa May isn't just supporting it and arming it as they bomb Yemen now with British bombs, and I've been to a refugee camp and met people who fled that horrendous situation, which I'm afraid our government is up to its neck involvement in, but it is having a big impact in terms of spreading radicalisation. If we're going to talk about support for brutal dictatorships and links to extremism, let's have it, and let's talk about what their alliance with the Saudis is.
I think that you and I are actually probably much closer aligned on things like foreign policy issues and where our supports and our money go in particular than we would would be on most other issues. But I think that there is a very big difference between potentially having allies and trade allies in particular across the world where they don't support the same level of human rights that we would like to see, because usually those kinds of trade agreements and things like that can help the people in those countries. But coming out in support, whether it be through tweets or articles, even as recently as 2012, 2013, about how great Venezuela is as people die in the streets. I mean, you have to admit that there is a kind of radicalism coming from his own personal views that have nothing to do with the benefit of the UK that we haven't necessarily seen from any other politician. Forget the Tories, but Tim Farron and UKIP and the rest of it.
I think the British government, look, they put the flag at half-mast when the Saudi dictator died. We have explicit support for one of those barbarous regimes that on the face of the earth today. On the issues, though, and I think this is the critical point, the Tories at the moment are rattled because they thought this would be a walkover. They didn't expect a week... Which is
why they call the election.
Exactly, to crush all opposition in this country. It was a vanity election, it was an arrogant election, it's full of hubris.
Well, not necessarily vanity.
Of course it was vanity.
It was to have better negotiating powers with Brexit.
But that's a lie, I'm afraid, because if you talk to people in the EU, they have no interest in how many seats Theresa May has, no interest whatsoever. And actually, do you know what they're saying? They think it will weaken, it'll have a weaker British situation, because if she had a small majority, that would mean Tory backbenchers would put her feet to the fire, and actually they think maybe she'll have more leeway. But on the actual critical points here, though, last night what you saw is Theresa May being heckled and laughed at over her policies on the NHS, which was plunged into a humanitarian crisis, and real terms fall in pupils' funding, which is vandalism. You know, if you don't invest in your children, you're not investing in your future.
Usually the simple answer is the right answer. And I think in the most simplest terms, Theresa May wanted to be able to create Mayism. She wanted to be able to have a government that wasn't tied to the pledges that David Cameron and George Osborne made. Now, I'm personally slightly horrified about some of those pledges because it seems like any kind of fiscal restraint and fiscal responsibility has been completely abandoned. Now, Labour was never pretending that they were going to be responsible, but for a while the Tories were. All of that's been completely abandoned. This may give Theresa May some opportunity to go even stronger in immigration. She hasn't admitted to how she's going to carry that out, and that's deeply concerning. But I'm also just very concerned that in last night's debate, what I don't think we got enough of was where Labour is on its economic policies, because we spent so much time talking about foreign policy. Okay. Those issues weren't pushed enough, and those are just as horrifying as May's flip-flopping.
Just on, I mean, immigration, critical point. Well, Theresa May, and a classic example, sets targets she won't meet. Labour, on the other hand, say, stop undercutting by having stronger workers' rights, and that will stop people's wages being...
No,
that isn't from the money tree. That's just having proper workers' rights in this country, so we can't have the undercutting of wages, which I've met so many people, that's their concern.
OK, thank you both, as always. It's great to talk to you. Thank you. And you can watch the highlights of last night's election special later this afternoon. Maybe Corbyn, the battle for number 10 here on Sky News 4:30.